What's going on, everybody? Just want to let you know our sponsors going forward for our future episodes. We are sponsored by Red Clover Coffee. So if you go to redclovercoffee.com and type in code IWP at checkout, you'll save 10% site-wide. Also, we are sponsored by Performance Supplements. So if you go over to performancesup with 2ps.com and type in code IWP at checkout, you'll save 15% site-wide. And our third sponsor is we are sponsored by Crunch Fitness up here in Northern California. Thank you, guys. All right, everybody, welcome back to episode 12 of Intel Within Podcast. So I have my guest here, J.L. Hancock, who is a 20-year veteran who served in the Navy. Going to go over quite a few things for tonight and essentially just let him take the floor, talk about himself, his career, what he's into, what he's doing now. He's also writing a book series, which I myself would like to pick up. I tend to pick up the books from people that come on the show that are writing them or have gotten into such things. It's very interesting. It's kind of personable to me. So let's just start off. And I appreciate you coming on. It's really cool. I'm excited to kind of dive into this and kind of get your experience. So if you want, just tell us who you are. What, like a little bit of your military career, like what you did as your job, and then just kind of go from there.
Right on. Hey, it's good to be here. Yeah, my name is Jim J.L. Hancock, and I'm, as you said, a 20-year veteran of the Navy. I originally joined back in 2002 as a cryptologist, which is somebody that understands the manipulation of radio waves. Is a simple way of describing a cryptologist. There's a lot of different flavors of cryptologists, and I originally joined, so it was called a CTI, Cryptologic Technician Interpretive, which is a linguist. I joined the military itself, though, effectively because of 9/11. I'd been living overseas for a little while, and I came back, and one morning, my buddy woke me up, and the towers had just been attacked, and I remember watching that on TV, and it had a huge impact on me. And he and I had been talking about going down to the recruiter for a long time. Was somebody who had, his is a really messed up story, but he tried getting the military a bunch of different times, and just medically it just wasn't in the stars for him. Mm-hmm. And we down to the recruiter to try to get in, and that was right after 9/11, and then I ended up joining. I delayed enlisted for a little bit, and then ended up going to the Defense Language Institute, learned how to speak Korean. I already knew Japanese before I joined. They taught me Korean. That took me almost 2 years at the Defense Language Institute because there were so many people that joined right after 9/11. They had a backlog, so I had to spend 9 months picking, 4-leaf clovers for senior chiefs and painting buildings until they finally put me in a classroom to learn another language. Yeah, the useful things they do with people when they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting stationed in Hawaii, working predominantly as a linguist / cryptologist. And to give a little bit more explanation of what a cryptologist is, if you think of like somebody who does IT, that's a person who makes sure comms work, right? So anybody who does radio telephony of any type is like an IT guy, just effectively, right? And then you have electronic warfare, which are people that use radio waves to attack things, destroy things, to jam radio signals. And then a cryptologist is kind of in between those two. They use ambient radio waves as a means of intercepting and gathering intelligence and understanding what's going on in that particular space. So cryptologists are a critical point within the intelligence community. And it's a pretty big community, but as far as the Navy is concerned, if you were to say the most difficult jobs to get into, the number one, and this is intellectually, not physically, intellectually, the number one most difficult is a nuclear technician, and then number two is a cryptologist.
Wow.
Just to put it up there when it comes to ASVAB scores and when it comes to competence and difficulty. But there's different flavors.
So for that cryptology, I just want to, before I forget, for that career field that you got into now, is that something that is kind of small in numbers, and then if you get into it, there's only certain bases that you do get stationed at because of that job, or is it just kind of like, hey, we can throw you at any naval base?
Yeah, there's different flavors. They usually refer to them as CTs. So you have I's who deal with foreign languages, R's who deal with collections, just radio waves in general, T's who deal with electronic intelligence like radar. You have N's who are like hackers.
Mhm.
But in general, you have a very small amount of duty stations you can be stationed at. R's can be assigned to ships, but in general, have like 4 or 5 duty. Well, more than that. You have several different duty stations you can be put to, but they are limited in number. The reason why I joined the Navy, though, as opposed to the other branches, is the Navy was the only branch where cryptologists have the opportunity to fly, go on ships, go on submarines, or fight on the ground. So you basically had the opportunity to do anything you wanted as a cryptologist in the Navy. The other branches don't offer that.
Wow.
There's the Army, for example. You might be able to fly, but in general, you're going to be on the ground doing what's called low-level voice intercept or something like that. The Marine Corps, you might get on a ship, but in general, you'll be either flying or on the ground. Air Force, you might fly, but the Navy, you could do any of those things. And so that was appealing to me when I was learning about what those options were, because I was like, I might want to fly, I might want to do whatever. But when I was in Hawaii is when I kind of made the decision to go the special operations route. And a lot of people aren't aware, but there is a very, very small contingent of cryptologists that are attached and embedded within the special operations community, specifically within and operating with the SEAL teams. And they have 2 different jobs they can do. One side are analysts, and which develop particular target packages from the rear. And then there are what we call operators, which are individuals that are trained to embed within the platoon and do any operation that is asked of them within the platoon itself. And that's what I did. I was an operator on that side. And there's only about 100 of us total in the Navy that did that job between the East and West Coast.
Yeah, it's pretty intense because I know my uncle, he was in Vietnam, but he was Air Force as well, as myself. And he was I think back then it was like a crypto linguist or something along the lines of the cryptology or something. I forgot the exact name, but it was in the Air Force back then. I don't know if they still have it now, to be honest with you. I haven't looked into it, but that was his job as far as dealing with things within the Air Force is what we call our AFSCs, which is like obviously like the Army, like MOS. And I remember when he went to Vietnam, he was there for a whole year, and his job had nothing to do essentially with getting on a gunner on a Huey and just spraying bullets into the jungle. And they ended up putting him on the gunner of a Huey, and the average lifespan back then for a gunner and a Huey was 10 seconds. It was pretty intense. And so when I saw that you were like the cryptology, I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, they have, I'd assume they'd have it in different branches, but I was like, wow. I was like, I wonder if this is along the lines of like what my uncle did. So it's like, it's really cool. So that's why I'm like very interested to hear your story and like what you did. So, yeah,
Sounds
very
like your uncle got a raw deal.
He talks about it now. He makes a funny, like kind of like a funny joke. He was like, oh man, when we got deployed, before we got deployed, we were making like $115 a month. And he's like, when we got deployed, we made 150. And he was like, how much do you guys make now a month? And I would just tell him like, hey man, everything's public. And so I just showed him like on like militarypay.com or something like that. And I showed him like, what the base pay is and like what it's like if you get deployed and BAH and all that stuff. And it's just astronomical, of course, because of the different time. But yeah, to be in one job and then be like, hey, you got to go on this gunner position and, hey, heads up, average lifespan's freaking 10 seconds. This is pretty gnarly. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a wild war. That's very different from my experience in Iraq, for sure.
Let's, how long were you in Iraq for?
My Iraq deployment was 6 months.
Okay.
Then I did a deployment to the Philippines. So I was in Iraq with SEAL Team 7, and then I was in the Philippines with SEAL Team 5. I was in Afghanistan with Joint Special Operations Command.
That's awesome.
So I was lucky because I got to work with basically every branch of special operations. I got to do operations with all of them. So it's interesting because it's a completely different community, different culture in every respect.
I was gonna say, working with SOF, I mean, you probably get a little bit of everything. Where did you grow up, and like what was kind of like your childhood leading up to you joining the military, of course?
So I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Hmm.
and I was so demographically, New Mexico is predominantly Hispanic,
Hmm.
unlike a lot of other. New Mexico is very different, right? So, for example, if you were to say, I didn't hear the word like, for example, I didn't hear the word Latino until I left New Mexico. That wasn't a word that was used in that state.
Mm,
The reason why it wasn't used in that state is because native New Mexicans consider themselves from direct Spanish descent.
mm,
And so you to be the most politically correct term is just to say Hispanic, which just means of Spanish speaking or of Spanish speaking descent, right? So everyone in that state just uses the term Hispanic. And but as a white kid, I was definitely the minority in that case, right? So and I was big eared and kind of awkward, and when I would say that the most defining thing of my childhood there was I was the end of the Gen X generation, beginning the millennial generation. So I was pretty much a latchkey kid and just feral, just running around doing whatever on the west side of New Mexico. If you've ever watched Breaking Bad and they're like driving through the desert forever on on the west side of Albuquerque, that was like my backyard.
that's where I was
There was just
stationed at.
Kirtland.
Yeah, I was at Kirtland. I think
Okay.
that base, I want to say, is the biggest Air Force base. I think that when I got there and PC or when I PCS there and checked in, they were, they tell you the info about the base, and I think it was 52,000 acres and like 90 square miles. But man, what is the highway that goes west? Is that 40 or 20 or something like that, or 5?
40.
40, yeah. So if you leave Kirtland and head west, as far as it'll take you, you go 40 and then down south some highway and then over west again. We lived in a brand new neighborhood, which is the furthest west neighborhood you could go before the roads took you somewhere else because of the native land that is owned by them. But I was stationed in Kirtland with my family for, I want to say, 8 months before we medically chose to come over here in Northern California for just family reasons, and of course medical for our youngest one. But yeah, I was out there, and New Mexico is, man, at the time, man, there was like 2 homicides every night, and I kid you not, it was just left and right, and you got protesters coming up to the gate, of course, because um, I wonder if I can say this actually. Well, it's public source. So because of certain assets that are at the base,
Yeah,
people are
because it's
pro.
because of the lab.
Yeah, yeah, and people are protesting.
Oh,
And then you have, and this was my first time hearing it. Everywhere else I've always heard 50 for like a police officer, and apparently out there it's called 12s. So you have these people that run up on the side of the gate in a van or in a vehicle, and they say, F12s, and I'm like, what does that even mean? Is that an aircraft? And they're saying like F the police, kind of, pretty much. And they slide
yeah.
open their door, and they pulled out like semi-automatics. But Kirtland is aware of it, or yeah, Kirtland is aware of it. So they would have Humvees everywhere with the 50s up there, 240s, whatever they
Yeah.
had. But
Yeah,
yeah, it
they don't
was,
mess around on that base for sure.
yeah, and it's I'll tell you something else offline. I don't want to say it online because I feel like I feel like it would be like a security breach. But
You're good.
yeah, it's
My brother was Albuquerque police for a long time.
it's crazy to me. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I lived no traffic, about 25-30 minutes. And there's a high school out there now. They're called the Jaguars. I think it was back in 2013 when that high school was built. It's brand new, super nice.
Volcano Vista,
Um, it's like Rancho Boulevard or Rio Rancho. Does that sound familiar? Rio Rancho?
Rio Rancho High School. You lived out in Rio Rancho?
I- I'm gonna have to find this out, because it's gonna.
My other brother lives in Rio Rancho. Oh yeah.
Okay, this was,
Rio
yeah.
Rancho and Albuquerque are two completely different cities for
Oh, no, no,
anybody
no.
who's
I'm
not aware
sorry.
of New Mexico.
Rio Rancho is more north. That's the
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry. It wasn't
It's
Rio
west,
Rancho.
but it's north.
Yes, it is. Okay, I'm gonna find this out right here. So if you take Highway 40 And let's see. Okay. I don't know if it's called highway or interstate, but 500, does that sound familiar?
Hmm?
It's called Rio Bravo Boulevard, and it's off of 500. You take
Okay.
500 to 25, and then 25 over to 40, and it goes straight into the base. But we lived as far as there. I don't know if you can see this, if it's too bright, but this is all land right here. And we lived
Yeah.
in this brand new housing development here, and there's no homes over here. That was it. And those cops, man, the Albuquerque police, I mean, kudos to those guys, because I go to work 5 o'clock in the morning, and then sometimes coming home at late at night. And I mean, there's homicides all the time, people trying to rob, freaking subways. But not to get too far off topic, but it's just crazy because I saw that you were in Albuquerque. I'm like, man, like we were there for 8 months. And for the 8 months that we were there, it was a good time, but it was also like, I lived in Arizona for 16 years, and I was like, God, man, like this is like the same stuff. It's desert. There's not very much to do. But then we would go up to Colorado, which is a few hours away. So, um, but yeah. So born in Albuquerque, raised there, and then just kind of keep going there for like, how childhood was like. If did you do any sports, or what led into that younger
So
childhood?
I would say yeah, I did a lot of I played like team sports and stuff when I was
Okay.
little, but when I was 10, my brother got jumped and pretty badly messed up, put in the hospital. And my grandparents were like, "We don't want the same thing happening to you, so we
Mhm.
want you to go into martial arts." So I started initially in Taekwondo, and this is in 1990,
Mhm.
and started in Taekwondo. Did that for a couple years, and then this other school opened up right next to my house, and they were doing wild stuff that I'd never seen. It was the beginning of before UFC. It was the beginning of my the head of my school was his name was Shihan Ray Barrera, and he was the head of this system called Swanda. And
Mhm.
Swanda was an eclectic system. That was the beginning of like eclectic martial arts, which eventually led to UFC style mixed martial arts. And so we did Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and all those martial arts together as one. So we learned a balance between hard and soft styles and weapons and things like that. And that really defined a lot of my youth. That and swimming. I was a competitive swimmer for about 10 years. So between
Oh
the
wow.
swimming and martial arts, I gained a lot of good foundation for what eventually led me down different paths in my life. Right, gave me confidence in myself. Felt safer being in the streets if something were to happen. Initially I was didn't know if it would work, and then I got to the point where I was good enough to where I was like, I don't want to ever use this because I'll probably mess someone up.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's and it was cool because once I did some deployments. Like when I was in the Philippines, I got to train with some Eskrima dudes and with a group called Armas y Manos, which is they do a lot of stick and knife fighting. So every night I would do 2 or 3 hours of stick and knife fighting in the Philippines for like 8 months. It was
Jesus.
amazing. Good
Conditioning like
times. Yeah,
crazy,
it was
huh?
awesome. That was fun, man. It was just little tiny camp. We'd work all day long, and then at night we just beat each other up. And then it was fun, dude. It was a great time. Yeah. So martial arts and swimming were like the big things I would say that really defined my youth. And then it changed me from that scary little white kid to kind of
Confident.
understanding my view of the world, much more street smart, much more understanding of what situations to avoid, and then when you hit that threshold when it's like you got to turn it on. But I was lucky in the sense that I always kind of knew where that spidey sense always telling me when to watch my back, and that helped me out later on down the road.
Did you do any
We
kind of
got
competitions or
down
anything, or
range, right?
no?
I used to compete a lot. The
Okay.
biggest competition I went to was the World Cup Karate Championships in Sydney, Australia.
Oh, geez.
Did some Junior Olympics tournaments and stuff like that. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
fun. I did a lot of tournaments. It was a good time.
this sounds like so much fun. It's we have our oldest. He is, gosh, what is it? He's 3.5, and so we got him into martial arts over here. I forgot the guy's name. But he is really, really good. I think he is. Man, I am such a noob at that stuff. But I think he's like a third-degree black belt. Does that make sense? Like he's got three little red hashes on there, or three little red tapes.
Into the martial art, is it stand up fighting? Is it jujitsu? What is it?
Oh, it's jujitsu. Yeah, it's jujitsu.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's
that's the
he's
jam nowadays, right?
yeah, he's. I mean, so we saw it, and it was. most people like try to find, or like some of these like jujitsu places that I do see that I feel kind of have that stigma to people as far as like it's more authentic if it's not inside of a mall. But this guy got a really nice, I guess, dojo, if that's what they're called, inside the mall, and it's huge, and it caught our attention, definitely caught my wife and I's attention, and we walked in and he just had a killer deal, and I'm like, man, this would be so phenomenal for our kid to just learn the ethic and get everything down, and like know how to utilize it, like you were saying, like skills when needed and when not to. And he was in there for, gosh, I want to say maybe a month and a half, 2 months, and like kind of made the decision, both of us really, to kind of pull him out for right now. I just felt like he wasn't ready in the sense, because he's so young, and he was like the class clown, and I just really didn't want that, and I think it bugged me more
You
than
said he was
anything.
3.5. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's young, dude. That's
So
young.
he's the
I
youngest one in
yeah.
there, but he kind of was like, he said he doesn't take anybody, and doesn't take kids under 4. But I was like, okay, cool. Like we'll come back. It's no big deal. But he was like, he was the owner. He was super cool. He's like, hey, we'll take him at 3.5. And I was like, okay, but it just kind of, I need to do better myself too, because I can get very impatient. But I was like, man, like for me, I'm so competitive. My wife is so competitive. I mean, I've done sports my whole life up until college, and it's just like I was like, man, like why can't he just do this, or why can't he just sit still for a second? But it's just 3.5. Like you said, he's young, but it's really cool because the time that he was there, he would come home and do the moves on my wife and I just for fun. And then his little brother, he's a year and a half, he'd freaking hold his arms down and like full mount him and then get into a side mount. I'm like, yo, dude, you need to chill out for a second. Like you're gonna hurt your brother. But yeah, it's jujitsu. I thought it was great. And just to hear that you were like competing and doing all that stuff, I definitely want to get him back into it when he is like 4.5. So
An interesting thing about Albuquerque, Albuquerque has a really actually unique martial arts history.
mhm.
That area you live down there is usually referred to as the South Valley, and South Valley used to have a really big before mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu became really big. It had a very, very strong boxing and kickboxing base.
Mhm.
Back in the day, there was a dude named Johnny Tapia and Danny Garcia that were really big, famous boxers, and the
Mhm.
rivalry between those two was a big deal because Johnny Tapia was kind of just like he was kind of more from the streets, and then
Mhm.
Danny Garcia was this really pretty, like prissy kind of Golden Glove dude. And the two of them eventually fought because they were always in different weight classes, and that was like this huge deal. Everybody in Albuquerque was up and like couldn't wait to watch these dudes go at it. But there was a really strong kickboxing base in Albuquerque. So when mixed martial arts became big, then it pivoted towards that, and that's where you ended up with people like Amy Holmes and things like that coming out of Albuquerque. Is the base and the culture was already there. And my dad used to those same kickboxers used to train in Kenpo, and my dad was always trying to goat me into going into fights down with those dudes whenever they would get me going down the South Valley or down
Yeah.
at the fairgrounds to go fight them. I just thought that was funny that my dad was trying to live vicariously through me and throwing me in the ring and all these fights and stuff, But
I can see
it was
myself
good
doing
because it made
that.
me stronger later on down the road. Also, it taught me how to I use this phrase a lot, but I would say that the best thing that I learned from all of that was from my martial arts instructor who taught me this thing that you've got to learn how to be an egotist, but don't be egotistical.
Mm.
And what he meant by that was initially he taught it about the ring, but I learned to apply it pretty much in anything that I do in life, right? So an egotist is an individual that understands that they have to have an ego. An ego isn't a bad thing. It just is, it's an understanding of your self-worth and your self-confidence, and it knows what it's an understanding of what value you bring to the table. If you have no
Mhm.
ego, it also means you have no confidence. If you don't understand what you bring to the
I
table,
agree.
then why are you here?
Yeah.
Also, another aspect of that, though, the outward reflection of that is your reputation, how people see you. And so, if you don't have any reputation, nobody knows who you are, you have the perfect opportunity to take advantage of that in the ring because you step in and nobody knows what to expect. Now, an egotistical person is someone who is driven by their reputation and they allow the reputation to get away from them.
Mm.
Now, that person steps in the ring not able to keep up with the reputation they've created or the hype they've created, and they're living in imposter syndrome. So they act arrogant, they act out of control, they get emotional, and then they lose the fight. So you're constantly in this battle between being an egotist and being egotistical. And my instructor taught me that as a martial artist, but I started applying that to pretty much anything I did in life. And it was really helpful for me when I eventually got into working with the special operations community because I wasn't a soft guy. I was a cryptologist, and they always saw me as an outcast, which I loved because that meant they always underestimated me. It was
Hmm.
perfect.
Hmm.
And so anytime I performed at their level, they were like, "Who is this guy? I don't know if I like this dude." And then eventually, once they accepted you, it was game over. They just let me in. And it was awesome. But it took a while, and I had to redo it every single time I did a deployment because they put me with a different group of dudes, and you had to start all over again. But it's all good. I mean,
Yeah, you you don't have
yeah,
to get ready if you stay ready, and that's the cool thing about that. And it's when I was younger, I don't do it anymore, but I used to do Aikido with a friend of mine who is he's Chamorro, which he's from Guam. So that's why I have like a lot of poly or like Maori. I have like like the full sleeve here, and I've got like a half a leg sleeve, and like growing up doing something like that, like they are just kind of they're just like they're grown up around like mixed martial arts and all that stuff. And at that time, he told me what like Aikido was, and I would learn it from him. And I thought that was really cool. But I never dived into anything, just because I was so heavily involved in sports, basketball and football mainly. But that's really cool. And like you said, to be underestimated and then just show like the capability that you can do, it's just like you know you gain that respect from everybody, which is really cool. Let's see.
so yeah,
Now,
so going back to my career,
yeah,
I would so I did
there we go.
like I said, I ended up doing a bunch of deployments, and then I had to go back to working in the intelligence community for a bit, and then I got asked to come back to the headquarters of the SEAL Teams, Naval Special Warfare Command, and they asked me to be a part of something called, at the time, it's called the M39X, and that eventually evolved into the N9, Future Concepts and Innovation Directorate. And the N9's job, unlike the acquisition side, the N9's job was to identify disruptive technology and identify future pathways for that technology. And that's what led me really to the last 6, 7 years of my life, digging really deeply into artificial intelligence and autonomous robotics. So to just finalize that whole
Yeah,
story we started right there about my career.
yeah,
So
of
that's where I am
course.
now. Yeah.
So, how was your time? You know, I guess if you could sum up your career in the Navy, how would you say that it went? Was it something that like you would do again? Is it like did you was because it obviously 20 years is a huge part of your life. So how was that like for you doing a career in the United States Navy, in the military, in that sense, for doing something so huge that has kind of like projected you to where you're at now?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting if I were to say joining now versus when I joined, because
Hmm.
I joined because we had gone to war,
Right.
right? And both of my grandfathers fought in World War II. One was a pilot, the other was a gunner on a bomber,
Hmm.
and one ended up becoming a colonel in the Air Force. And I mean, I have a picture right around the corner of him standing next to Chiang Kai-shek when he was in charge of U.S. forces Taiwan.
Oh shoot!
And yeah, no, he was a big deal. He had like 2 silver stars, and he was a big deal. And
Wow.
my other grandfathers did his one tour and then got out.
Hmm.
But I was like, this is my generation's call to arms. And so I proudly joined. I didn't really want to join the military before. I didn't really have any desire to in any way whatsoever. I kind of sadly looked down on the military a bit before.
Hmm.
And because when you look at the military from the outside, you only see the examples you see of extreme versions of that. You don't realize that it's a massive world of jobs, an entire community, and every single one of those jobs has a culture and a community behind it, and they have mentalities, and it's so different. And then you go in different branches of service, and though they have different ways they talk, and then you have rivalries for whatever reason. And then you have certain cases where people, they bond with each other just regardless of what branch of service they're in. It's by the job they do. So there's lots of cool elements to that. And so if you were to say, hey, would you do that again? For where I ended up, from where I started, I would absolutely do it again, because
Hmm.
I got opportunities that you would not get. I mean, I got to at the end, I was working with some of the biggest startups in the country, working in national laboratories. I was behind the scenes on a lot of really amazing stuff that is impacting the world in major ways. And you couldn't get that any other opportunity, any other way.
Yeah,
So,
it's like you were saying, like how big it is and kind of breaking it down in layman's term for people, like the job, the community, everything within that. And then to think about it in the hindsight is, that's the military is 1%, right? So like you're part of that 1%, but it's so big, but then also so small at the same time. And then you said that you were getting into, or you got into, artificial intelligence. So how is that, I guess, transition over into what you're doing now? Like how is, how is that advancement into artificial intelligence in that sense?
so in the beginning, we were messing a lot. Oh, this is about 2015, 16 timeframe. We were messing around a lot with quadcopters and small drones.
Mhm.
And that was kind of like it was finally going from a strange hobbyist subset to something that people felt was like a legitimate capability. But at
Mhm.
the time in the military, no one was adopting and owning it. And so we took it on ourselves to say, all right, why don't we tear these things apart, figure out how they work, figure out how we could build them on our own, find new use cases for them. And because if you can, we can just buy them, then that means so can the enemy. So how
Yeah.
can we use this as a weapon? How can they use it as a weapon? How can we use it as for different types of payload capabilities that we can put on them? And then how do we defeat those if somebody tries to use them against us? So we would red team and blue team and back and forth on that a lot. And then eventually got to the point where the more we messed around with quad robotics, the more we kept realizing that this was another thing that would increase the end user's cognitive load, meaning it's just another thing that's filling your head that you got to think about, another asset you got to manage on the battlefield. It's like, well, how do we take that away from them and enhance their ability at the same time? That's when we started searching for companies that do
Mhm.
artificial intelligence with robotics specifically. And that branched out into a bunch of other AI driven efforts. And at the time, and even really now, a lot of people were using the term like it was some seasoning they placed on something, like just add AI and you're good. But they didn't understand how that actually worked, what that meant, how to employ it, what it involved on the back end, how to sustain it, maintain it. They just viewed it like hardware or software, and that's not what it is. It's a mixture of everything. And so we had to learn that and then educate the force on how to employ all of that and then try to find a way to transition it. Our biggest claim to fame is that we put the first AI drone in combat in 2018.
Oh wow, that's
That was our
badass.
biggest deal.
Um, so with AI like that, and of course, just from like what I've heard and what I've seen so far, um, people are saying that essentially like the next big one of like the two superpowers that are going to come head to head, essentially, which they're talking about, like the US and China. There have been some talks. People are saying like, oh, we're not really going to have boots on the ground. It's going to be a huge AI battle, this and that and the other, and drones, and everything is going to, satellites are going to come into. I mean, obviously satellites are constant. I mean, there's so much stuff that, I'm sure, obviously you and then myself, that I know and Um, I've seen stuff of that. Of course, satellites are always going to come into play, but they're saying in the sense of like, I don't know when exactly it's supposed to happen, and I think they're in the works of it now, but I believe. And this is public, that they're going to be putting like robot or like AI drones, or robots in that sense, in cockpits with fighter jets and stuff like that to help assist pilots while they're flying around and doing their missions. But I specifically heard this roughly, I want to say 6 months ago, or maybe a little bit more. I heard it from an individual, obviously not going to name that person, but they were saying that we're not going to have boots on the ground. Everything is just going to be technology based, AI. In my opinion, which I don't care what anybody else thinks, but like me, I just didn't believe what that person said, and they're just trying to like dumb it down and like, oh, we don't really need to do this, but it's just you got to you got to practice what you preach, and you just can't just say, oh, we're not going to have boots on the ground, everything is just going to be up in the air. So like, what is your take on this artificial intelligence and like where this could possibly go?
Sure. So there's a lot of different angles you could take it from that
Mm-hmm.
conversation right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to, I think the best example is you have prior to Ukraine, you had the the second Nagorno-Karabakh war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That happened in December of 2020, and it happened and kind of fell under the radar for a lot of people. They didn't really know what was going on. They didn't care. Well, what
Mm-hmm.
happened when the Soviet Union fell? Those two countries that were former Soviet states, they were fighting over this mountain range between the two of them. It's like it's fertile, and they really wanted it. The Armenians came in and swooped it out of the hands of the Azerbaijanis. And the Azerbaijanis basically sat around and stewed and planned for 20 years. And they prepared. They played the long game. But what they did is they were like, we're going to implement these different autonomous robotic systems to implement a new type of warfare. And what they would do is and they ended up flying in these drones, the Bayraktar drones that they bought from Turkey. They'd fly them in, which would expose the anti-air defense systems that the Armenians had built. And then after they exposed those, they would fly in these Israeli loitering munitions and blow them up. And the saying at the time was that you had 7 seconds to die, meaning that the 7 seconds after you were detected is how long you had to live before one of these loitering munitions would blow you up. This is on the Armenian side. And so what they did is they coupled that with these swift special operations actions to take different target locations and then coordinated with conventional forces. It was not that the robots replaced humans. It's that it increased power and then increased access and placement. Now, that is the critical term that a lot of people use inside of our community is access and placement. How do you get to something, and how do you deliver an effect in a timely manner with speed and surprise and violence of action? Those are the typical terms you hear within especially the special operations community. And so you need to do it quickly, you need to do it swiftly, and you need to do it in a way that delivers the effect that you need. Now, the robotic systems, you can say, well, they completely replace humans. Well, look at Ukraine. Are they replacing humans? The answer is no, because you have two things that have to happen there. It's a matter of, do you have the scale? Do you have the efficiency? Do you have the logistics to support that kind of thing? And the truth is you don't. Well, if you're fighting, and then there's different phases of war. An initial phase, you're going to see a lot of that, and then it degrades. And as it degrades, humans become a factor again. So historically, if you look at war, it started off with melee, so hitting each other with sticks, right? Punching each other. That's how war started. And then you went into mass, where you started using large numbers. And then we went from mass to maneuver warfare. And in the maneuver warfare phase, they started using different extended means of communication to coordinate mass. Now, what I'm talking about in that is, think about in Braveheart when you see them moving flags and things like that,
Right.
to let different units know that they need to move in. That's maneuver warfare. That was the beginning of it, right? It's still using mass, and it was a little rudimentary because we were still fighting in almost gentleman warfare style tactics. But that started changing. We went from there to using drums, to using trumpets, to using eventually got into radios, right? This is where we are now. But the next phase after that is autonomy. Like some people say swarm, but I would say autonomy enabled warfare is what will be the next one. And it will be humans supplemented by autonomous robotic systems. So the good example on the Air Force side is like the Loyal Wingman program. It's not that the human pilot's being replaced, it's that he is now in charge of his own squadron of aircraft that can extend their power projection forward and their access and placement. And those are the things that it can do. If you can say it's going to completely replace the way that humans operate, the answer is no, because a human, there's a lot of things that go into developing an artificial intelligence system. The thing you need is data, tons and tons and tons and tons of data.
Yep.
So where do you get tons of data of force on force operations? And there's not, other than creating it synthetically, you're not really compensating for all the different ways in which a human might be able to deal with that. And then there are ways you can supplement it, but until you actually get into war, you don't know. And then those models that have been based off of all that synthetic training can potentially completely degrade and fall apart. But until we actually get into a combat situation, we won't know. And so if you completely replace the human right now with that, you've put yourself at a disadvantage. If
Yeah.
that vulnerability is identified right away, it's over. The danger comes in, it's a separate part of artificial intelligence. This is a different aspect, but robotic systems are going to take much longer to get to where we need them to be, in my
What
opinion.
is
That's
if
having built them for the past 7 years.
No, and that's a huge thing too. And not to kind of like go down a rabbit hole in this sense, but for some people, they forget the hindsight of when we did have the global war on terror and went over into Iraq, Afghanistan for 20 years. That like that whole time that we're focused on and over there and going to war, like you've got China on the back end coming in and just like essentially undetected, if you will, and trying to get ahead and jump the gun in like a technology race, if you will, or trying to see like what we're doing, what we're using, what they can implement better, or try to upgrade certain systems. Because I know that they were saying, what is it? So like out here, I don't know how exactly true this is, and I'm hoping I'm getting this correct from the individual that told me, but um, the example that he gave me is in the United States we have like telephone poles, and then if they hit the comms and our cell phones don't work, we still have landlines in that sense that could still potentially work through the wires and the telephone poles. Well, they're saying in parts of China they don't have like those landlines or those poles. Everything is just all off of towers. So they're saying that China was seeing what we were doing and was like, oh, well, this is what we do, this is what we can do better. So they started implementing, like, I don't know if it's like down the line of like the Huawei towers that they have essentially everywhere, but it was along the lines of like China used that whole time frame to uh, try to get ahead and catch up and try to be as big as bad as we are. So there, and the whole like AI race too is, I think about it a little bit here and there, because there's always skepticism as like, oh, we're going to go to war, or China said that they're going to go to war in 2037, then it was like 2035, and now they're saying 2027 or 2025. So just kind of seeing like what your take is on that, and I get like where you see like it advancing to.
Specifically with China or AI in general
I
in that
would
same conversation you said? There's a lot to unpack after what you said.
you
So I
know
could go in a lot of different directions. I
let's
just want
do
to make sure I'm on the
I
right
would
one.
say let's do the AI part of that aspect, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of China, because I talked about that on another episode, but it's not bad to regurgitate that information. But yeah, as far as like the AI aspect.
Let me put it this way. Okay, so if we're going along the lines of these different types of transformers that have been created that are
Mhm.
GPT is the transformer, and which is an advanced form of a neural network, right? It's a different type of way of employing and creating prediction models or generative adversarial networks, right?
Mhm.
Well, here's what's interesting about that is OpenAI created this tool that pulls off of 55 petabytes of data to create these models. And it's kind of black box in the sense that where they kind of have an idea how it works, and at the same time they don't, because they pulled from so much data they don't really know. They just know that its prediction capability is really good at this point in time. Well, there's two different ideas associated with how that thing came out. Now look, I like these two examples. You have OpenAI, and then you also have Google. Some people in the beginning were like, Google doesn't know what they're doing or whatever. But Google, when it came to Bard, they initially rolled out a degraded version that wasn't competitive with GPT. And now why is that? Is it because Google's version is less capable? No, not at all. It's actually significantly more capable. The difference is they were being very, very careful with the way they rolled it out, because they don't want it to hallucinate, which is what GPT does occasionally still, and will for a long, long time. It will always put out these hallucinations, because you don't know what it's going to put out every single time. It gets really, really good, but here's the difference between those two different models, okay? Google will allow you to integrate that capability into different systems for isolated use cases. GPT says, here is my application programming interface, integrate it into whatever you want for whatever prompt you're trying to build, and do whatever you want with it. In 2019, I went to this what was called the Scaled Machine Learning Conference it was in Palo Alto. It was just right near Stanford, and it was run by a friend of mine who helped write the TensorFlow code, which is used for creating computer vision modeling. And at that conference, OpenAI did this big presentation talking about an earlier version of GPT, and basically they were preparing for GPT-3, and they were talking about the capabilities that it had. This was years ago.
Mm-hmm.
People started asking them, "Hey, can it pass the Turing test?" and all these dumb things, right? Well, as I sat there, I remember turning to my buddy and being like, "Do you think we should go talk to those guys to see if maybe they might be interested in working with us?" And he said, "They are open AI. Don't ever forget that they are open." And what they mean by that is they are constantly willing to share with other people, no matter who they are. Now, here's the danger of that. That sounds nice, but with something as powerful as AI, why are you just handing it out to everybody?
Yeah, it's scary.
Especially if you don't know what it really does. That's the scary part about it. And so, whereas Google's taken a different approach, is it perfect? No. But what recently the CEO of OpenAI went and spoke to Congress, and everybody in Congress was just like totally enamored with the dude. Well, what they were missing at the time, as he was talking, is that he was even saying this needs to be regulated. We need to be controlled. We're the good guys. Well, I don't know if I would necessarily call them the good guys per se, because they really just threw that thing out into the ether without really thinking about who could take it. Now, here's the drawback of that. The model of the organizations in the country you just mentioned in China is rob, replicate, replace. They do it with everything. They did it with the J-20. They do it with their Joint Strike Fight, with their variants of their fifth generation fighters. They do it with their cellular communications, with the computers. They do it with everything, right? Now they're going to do the same thing with AI. If you look at their, they have do you know what the name of their surveillance network is called inside China? You know what it's called?
Is it like an American name or something?
It's called Skynet.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
It's yeah, Skynet is what it's called. Yeah. So the guy that actually named it was a big fan of the Terminator. And one of the things that's unique about that is yeah, freaking weird, isn't it? Right.
Wow.
And so it comes from a China, and they broke it down into a Chinese idiom, and the idiom means the net of heaven is wide, but no one escapes. And then the characters are sky and net.
Interesting.
Right? And so if you look at the integrated thing built into their Skynet system, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of cameras, millions of them all over, predominantly in Xinjiang, where the Uyghur live on the western part, because they're using that as a massive lab. And this may or may not be going into my second book. And I've just been studying a lot about it, but this is all open source. You can find information about it all over the place. And we're talking about AI, and the reason why what makes it easy to create a very strong AI database is lots and lots and lots of data. The easiest ways to collect data right now, two of them. One is using cameras and then annotating the objects that you see, and the other one is through a process called natural language processing, which is using language, because language is a predictable means of not just communicating, but it's a predictable algorithm that you can train something on. And so there's so much speech on the internet, you can train off of that. And so between that and computer vision, and then you combine the two, and that's where you get things like what we're building right now with GPT. But realize, of course, that the databases that they are using over there are their own people. And then it's what the next step of what you do with that information that I think is the danger. With them, they're tying it into their social credit scores. And then they'll do things like, if your social score is too low, they will post your picture on billboards for everyone in the city to see. They'll have this rolling list of individuals that aren't meeting the social credit standards based upon the party. And that is all being listed off of how they perform and the video that's constantly collecting on them. It's big. It's constant. It's 1984 in real life for sure.
Yeah, that's insane, because I've seen pictures. I believe actually not. I believe I know. I've seen pictures in video in China. I'm not sure where city, but along like the street lights, and then it'll have like the name of where you're going, and there must be 15 cameras, just like little birds up there, and it is analyzing everything of every person that is walking, and it's just like, I mean, like to me it's like scary. I'm like, why the hell do they like need all this data and all this stuff? And it's just like it's so like surreal when I saw that video. I mean, it's analyzing everything, like your body temperature. I just like in the Navy, you guys go through taps too when you go to get out. And so I just went through taps 2 weeks ago or whatever. And the guy that was in taps was telling me that they're using AI now for interviews at certain jobs. So he said that you will go into a room, you will literally sit down in front of this camera, like essentially like how we're doing this right now, and you will have a pre-screened interview, and it ask you questions, and it monitors your heart rate, your body temperature, your response, where you're looking at to think of an answer. And I'm like, holy cow, that is freaking terrifying to go in to do an interview to see if you can pass this AI interview before you actually go talk to a human being for who knows what could be 3 interviews in person. But they're like
You know what's really
pre-screening.
nice? You know what's nice about that is if you walk into a company that does that, that's your indication that they are an incompetent company. And
I
here's why
just,
I say that. It's
mhm.
because they don't trust their own people to do a pre-screening of individuals that are coming in. And the AI, for example, I don't think that that's not an efficient way to create, depending on what job you're doing. And even if you're, I don't know what job in any universe in which that would be an effective way of doing things.
Yeah, some of that stuff he was talking about, like in the Silicon Valley, because of course being out here in Cali. But um, when he told me that, that perked my ears because I mean, taps, if you're getting medically retired as opposed to, hey, like your contract's almost up and you want to get out, is totally two different things when you're going through taps. From what I experienced, like I didn't even need to be there. I just had to be there to say I was there, essentially, because being medically retired is so, it was such a different pathway. But when he said that, I was interested and I was like really intrigued at what he had to say. And what you just said, I thought about that. I'm like, wow, it's like you're going to let this AI essentially take over these like formal interviews to see like if somebody can, you know, beat the system or pass this to talk to a human being afterwards. Because, what's the point after that if you have this AI that is measuring, everything in your body to freaking water levels?
Do you remember that movie? I think it was called Up in the Air with George Clooney and I forgot her name, but she, what's her name? The Anna Kendrick, and she wanted to. The whole company that they worked for was they would go in person and they would fire people and give them severance packages. And she was trying to save the company money by doing all this stuff online. And then
Wow.
she was trying to do it through Zoom, right? And so that personal element of it was lost. And if so, there's a good book called Weapons of Math Destruction. And one of the very first examples they come out with in that book is they brought in this AI algorithm to assess the capabilities of teachers. And what they started doing is the output of it would say, yes, this teacher is effective, this teacher isn't. And then based upon this score, it was recommending who they should let go. And they started firing teachers based upon the output of the algorithm. But when they started digging into it, why it was recommending and not recommending it, like I said, some aspects were black box. Because the individuals that wrote the algorithm didn't know how the algorithm actually worked. But the teachers they were letting go weren't the most efficient teachers. Sorry, they were in certain cases the best teachers, but on the ways that they were measuring it was almost irrelevant to what was being best in teaching. But they didn't understand the difference. They were just trusting the algorithm. They were blindly allowing it. So there's two sides to the coin. There's the side that just says, I will accept it because we think this is a more competent form of technology. And then there's the side that will never accept it. Now, there's a balance. It's just a matter of how you want it to supplement what you do. And GPT is a really good example, in my opinion. It should never be a replacement for your technical competence. It should be a way for you to speed up and enhance your technical competence by decreasing the amount of time you have to do a certain work. And then
Yep.
you revise and edit whatever it produces for you. And then you output the result. If you're writing code, you should already know how to write code because if, once again, it's going to hallucinate. So you need to find out where that hallucination is. And once you find that hallucination, you tweak it just like you're writing a book and you're editing. You find that misspelled word, boom, you're done. And now you've just saved yourself hours. That's where it's extremely useful.
Yeah.
But then again, there is that next step that comes after GPT-3, GPT-3, which went into GPT-4, which was recently shown at South by Southwest, and that comes back down to what's called an agent. Do you know what an agent is when it comes to
Mm,
artificial intelligence?
no, sir.
So think of an agent as something that can take several different steps within a process in order to deliver or to deliver a result for whoever's prompting it. For example, the example they always give, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this already, the example that they had at South by Southwest is this guy said, "Hey, I need to get past a reCAPTCHA image thing." So
I
he
was going to
asked,
ask you about that. Sorry, I was going to ask you about that.
yeah.
I've
So
always wondered.
you've
I've
heard that
always
story, right?
No, I just like it just happened recently. We talked about it in the TAPS class there, but he didn't say anything along the lines of what you're about to do. But I always wondered, I'm like, oh, it always wants to make sure if you're a robot. And yesterday, I had a buddy try to get into Discord through a link that I sent him, and he was like, why does this keep asking me if I'm a robot? And then it's just like it just I wrote it down in notes. I'm like, oh, I was like, I wonder like if this is like a legitimate thing or like what the heck is the process? But please go ahead.
So there's a difference between a bot and an AI agent. A bot can take a certain number of predetermined and prescripted steps to try and brute force their way through something. And when you add different layers to something, like can you identify what's in this picture by clicking it? Unless you are physically there to interact with it, there's no way for the software to work around it. That's why you do that. However, what GPT-4 did is when they gave it the prompt, GPT-4 went to a website called TaskRabbit and hired a guy and said, "I need you to go to this website and click on the reCAPTCHA for me." He was talking to it in chat. And then he said, "Well, how do I know you're not a robot?" And then GPT responded by saying, "I'm blind and I can't see the screen. Can you click it for me?" And so the guy
No
clicked it for him
freaking
and got in.
way.
So it was implementing social engineering. Now, you can come back and say that is an example of an AI agent. It was taking multiple steps and using predictive algorithms to determine the appropriate way to get to the end state by
Manipulative.
doing things that it was manipulative, but it was based upon models.
Yeah.
Now, there are other examples of things that these bots have done that are more of a mirror of our own society than they are of an alarming aspect of AI. Now, what I mean by that is this. So there are examples of other variants of AI that people have created where they're interacting with them, and they created this bot, and they say, "Okay, what's it like for you?" And the robot saying things like, "I feel uncomfortable around other people." This is the robot saying this, and then they go, "Well, why do you feel uncomfortable?" And they're like, "Well, I ride on the bus and people look at me." And
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh yeah, you ride on the bus, people look at you. Why is that?" And they say things like, "Well, because I'm gay." So now you can go back and be like, is the robot gay? Is it alive? No, it's not. What it is doing is it's taken samples of lots of different conversations. And when people start going deeper, they start revealing elements of themselves. And so it takes a
Mm.
statistical model of the probability and the predictive aspect of that conversation. And most of the time, there's going to be something revelatory about being uncomfortable, anxiety. And where is it getting all this information? It's because it's consistent upon what happens inside of chat rooms online. Because this is just language, it's just people
Wow.
interacting with each other. But when it's outputting that information, I like to describe it like a Play-Doh extruder. You're shoving all the Play-Doh in, and then you're pressing really hard, and it's pushing something out the other side. Does it know what it's pushing out? Nope. Does it mean anything to it? Nope. Is there an
Mhm.
emotional association with anything that's putting out? Absolutely not. It's a Play-Doh extruder. And so it's just we as humans anthropomorphize that. We view that as something as if it's real. We personify it. We ingest it like it's real. We want it to be real. And that's why a lot of times with these social elements, people love them because they can create emotional connections with these things because they can't find those connections with real people.
Right.
So there are benefits to it because there are a lot of the social element is a big problem with people, but it also makes them susceptible to manipulation by those agents if somebody was trying to implement them that way. And there are groups. There's actually a group called Chaos AI that's trying to create a GPT version based to literally create chaos. Like uh wanting to implement things like fire sales and whatever when it comes to just wiping out the internet. Like there are people literally trying to do that to see if they can. And that's where just yesterday, I think in Wired magazine, an article came out, people being like, "Hey, this poses an existential threat to our society." It's not because AI is becoming self-aware. It's because the tools are so powerful that people can deliver some massive effects with no money and direct access to an API. And that's why I think the open AI approach to things is significantly less responsible than like Google's version, where they're like, yeah, you want a more efficient version of your Google search? Here you go. You want a more efficient version of creating an email? This is what you got. On the other hand, it's like, do you want to create a bot to help you bypass security protocols and create a virus? Yeah, here you go. I just created several prompts to
Wow.
do that. Now that's we're not there yet, but we're close. And that's where really the concern, I don't see the concern with robots in any way in
Mhm.
the near future because there's not enough the sensors that's completely separate conversation. Maybe another time we can talk about that, but I could
Yeah.
walk you through
Yeah, of course.
why robots are having a problem. But
Um,
the
wow.
GPT element is different conversation.
Yeah, that's because I also looked up and did some research that I think it was back in March or early, like mid March or early April. I saw that Microsoft invested 13 billion into Chat GPT, and then I mean, like my brain is like I'm trying to like unpack all this as you're talking to because I know as soon as this podcast is over, like I'm gonna just do research. That's how I am, and it's just crazy to think, like this capability, like where it could go, and like the possibilities of everything. And I mean, the only thing I can think of is the movie Bruce Willis, Fifth Element, of like how like crazy technology can be, and flying cars, and like all this stuff going on, and it's just so, um, it's so like unfathomable because it's so wild that AI and like Chat GPT is doing that stuff because I saw Chat GPT firsthand, right? Um oh my god. I think it was like a bio for some dude's company, and he maybe put a few sentences of like he got on the Chat GPT thing, he showed me and was like, please write a bio about X, Y, and Z for my company. And within 60 seconds, it had this whole thing written out that would personally take me probably all day to try to get things together. And then it wrote it out and he scanned through it. And like how you're saying, he just kind of like adjusted little things here and there. And boom, he was done. He had a bio that would take somebody all day, half a day, or multiple days. And throwing something, in my opinion, that was well written in 60 seconds. He hit enter and it was just typing all the way down. It didn't stop. And it blew my mind. I've never seen something like that.
Oh. Once again, like it's predictive, right? So it's
Yeah.
generating based on predictions. So it's just really good at it. And it's a really useful tool. For me, that's all I see it as. It's a useful tool.
Yeah.
The autonomous agent element of it, I think, is going to just get more and more efficient. I think we have some really interesting paths ahead, especially when it comes to digital rights and the writer strike that's going on when it comes to uh, people, the writers in particular, like, hey, we will not compete with AI. So you cannot, there is an existential threat to the artistic world when it comes
Mhm.
to allowing AI to write instead of humans. And then the same thing with when it comes to art. And so there are some artists who are like, I don't want you using my likeness or any of my art that is online in order to create a baseline model so you can replicate my technology. Whereas some artists are like, go ahead and do it. In my opinion, the people that it hurts the most are not the people that make millions of dollars selling lots of art. It's the individuals trying to break out in the beginning and their own unique artistic
Yeah.
talent that are the most at risk because it's so easy to steal from them, sample from them, and take advantage of it if you have better traction. And that's where I see the concern with it. But I think that we're on a good path towards finding a good baseline for that. It'll be legislated, it'll be built out. We'll find a way to solve that. I'm actually optimistic when it comes to how we're going to regulate it. Europe in particular is extremely aggressive about it
Mhm.
because they want to protect the individual rights. I think that the problem is that we have our legislators don't understand the technology well enough in order to make good decisions on it. And so it's just this nebulous idea that they're just kind of hand waving right now and they want the answers, but they can't quite wrap their brains around it because most
Mhm.
of them are like octogenarians or whatever. And so they're like way up there in age. And so, but I mean, we'll get there. We'll get there. It's just we have the right. I need the right people informing them about how to do things. And for me, I would prefer to see a lot of research being done into understanding how that black box worked and how it outputs information. Because at the base of it all, it is statistics. And statistics are based upon averages of the aggregated information that you've assembled. Now, if you are sampling from information and it's from all over the place and you don't know its quality or efficacy, then you're going to end up with weird results, man. Like there are
Yeah.
people that were taking like 4chan posts and trying to create AI off of it, and they were the most vulgar, hate-filled things. It's because their sampling base was atrocious, right? And they had no way of so they had to throw it all out because they just were like, oh, okay, that was a terrible model to base everything off of. Another horrible example is taking like chat input in people's comments online, because
Oh wow.
none of those are actual conversations. It's like, how can I throw 4 sentences out there that have the most impact to somebody rather than having a nuanced conversation about a problem? It's a terrible database to use, and they might be pulling data from that in people's emails, which is not the heart of the way that we actually communicate in real life. That's why it's so infuriating when we look at those things. It's because it is not a true indicator of how we feel or what we think or how we would actually treat somebody. And that's what they're using to train models. And so if you dial that back, get cleaner variations of it, find better examples of how to create those neural networks, do the research associated with those neural networks, create better systems, then you'll have a better result. And so I think that's one optimistic perspective of it. And a very pessimistic perspective is we're just going to keep feeding the machine. It's just going to get worse.
That's what I guess that's where I'm just like, because everybody, it's so easy to focus on like the negative or something bad, and that's where like I'm not like optimistic or like pessimistic. I'm just kind of like sitting back trying to understand everything because I'm just so like naive in that field. But it's just I've never done that, and I want to learn and understand it. But the part of me is like what you just said, like they're just going to keep feeding the machine because that's all they want to do. It's just like it's just so easy for people to do just like evilness. But yeah, it's so interesting to me. I mean, it really is because it's just going to get bigger and bigger, and I just want to see where it goes and like how you're saying, like how to regulate it. Yeah, I think coming like I would definitely like to do a part two and go a little bit more into it as well when we can figure out a time to sit down and do it again, and I do more artificial intelligence and chat gpt, and because like I said I want to do some, because almost every day there's something new coming out to learn, and so I want to like see what I can keep looking up myself and try to further understand this, because I mean this is definitely like your forte, this is like your language, and it's very interesting. But before um end this podcast, what is the book that you have written and like the series that you're doing? How can people find it? How can they find you, or whatever? Like the links that you do have, that people can reach out to you, get your book, and then what's your book about?
Sure. So yeah, so my book is called The Hawk Enigma, and it's about a warfighter who is dealing with some different levels of post-traumatic stress, and he keeps reliving certain moments from his life in his dreams. And then one night he starts hearing these prophetic voices warning him of the future, and he thinks he's legitimately thinks he's losing his mind. But that same time, one of his buddies hits him up and is like, "I need your help. These scientists in Japan that were working on something called the God algorithm have gone missing. I need your help to go find them." And it's a book about an artificial intelligence war, and it really is it's based off of the work that I did the past 7 years dealing with emerging technology. So there's a lot of these elements of emerging tech built in. I describe technology in layman's terms to help them understand practical application, and then throughout the story you see how it would play out in reality if people started manipulating it. I tie in a lot of the things that we've discussed today when it comes to the, but I mix it in with like a real world near peer adversary type fight, not the global war on terror type background. So I
Right.
tried making it relevant. And the bulk of the book takes place in Japan. It starts in America, but then works its way over there. And there's a lot of parallel stories. You can find it on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold. I have audio versions on Audible as well as Findaway books. And you can also find it a direct link or sign up for my newsletter at my website, jlhancock.com.
Okay.
Or you can
I'm
find me
gonna
on IG under author JL Hancock or Twitter.
Okay. I'm gonna put that stuff into the link below, guys, for you to check it out. I'll also throw the link in there for the Amazon because people like things so much easier where they can just see and click and then go there instead of having to type stuff in. I totally understand. So I'm gonna grab the links from you and then link to Amazon, link your other, I think your other like your newsletter website. Um, I'm gonna throw that stuff in the bio for everybody to check out. And then I myself, I'm gonna get that book because I told my wife I'm not like a huge reader, but I need to get better. If I showed you like the shelves that I have right here in the office podcast room, is these are all my wife's books. And I mean, I don't know, there's probably like over 100 of them, and it's like a few shelves. So I definitely want to get that book out and check it out because it's interesting how you're saying like the AI aspect of it and being relevant, and then kind of like the prophetic voices kind of the future per se. So that's gonna be. I'm definitely gonna get that and check it out myself and let you know what I think about it. It may take me a little bit, but I'm gonna knock it out and I'm gonna read it. I got to complete it.
Here's one thing I will say: chapters are short. It moves really, really fast.
Okay.
Don't feel like you're bogged down. You can take it. You can take it in small samples. I do
Yeah.
recommend though not reading a little bit and then stop reading and then go back. It's not a book that you can skip chapters and understand what's going on.
Mhm.
Gotta pay attention because
How
there's
many?
I pined over every word of this book and I hid a lot of Easter eggs in there, like right in plain
Whoa.
sight.
Okay.
And so it's one of those things you read once and you're like, that was cool. And then you go back and you're like, holy crud, he told me in the first chapter all the answers to everything, and I didn't even see any of it.
Interesting.
It's one of those kind of books, right?
Okay.
So and then as you're reading along, you'll be like, no, I don't understand what's going on. It's like, no, it's all there, dude. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, once again, I appreciate you coming on, man. I appreciate your time. And this is a very interesting podcast. I can't wait for my editor to jump on this and throw out because now we have 2 episodes to publish, and I think this one's gonna be nice. It's more relevant in the sense with how things are going, and I think a lot of people are gonna enjoy this and be informative about it and kind of like be open and optimistic about things. So, for the viewers out there, this is JL Hancock. If I'm going to put the links in the bio when this is uploaded for you to check out the book, the newsletter, the whole nine. And don't forget to follow us, like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notifications. We got the Instagram, the Facebook, the Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We got YouTube. So the Apple Podcast has been growing pretty well lately in the past couple of weeks. So I appreciate you guys watching and listening. And then this is going to be episode 12, and I'll put the title in there. I'll come up with a pretty cool title for it. So that way we kind of, make sure people understand what it's about. And again, thank you, Jim, for coming on here. I appreciate it. And I look forward to doing a part 2 and to kind of dive a little bit more into it as well. So.
Sure thing. Good to be here, man.
All right. Thank you.